Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Wherever you are in the world, we appreciate you being with us right now. This is Lovey Life, a Dome podcast. Dome is a digital and bilingual media company specialized in law at the supranational level. So, for all news, comments, analysis related to law in Africa and in the rest of the world, go to our website dome-online.com and follow us on our social media platforms, the links of which are listed below. This, however, is neither a technical nor a political podcast. To be honest, sometimes it's barely a legal one. The only prerequisite needed is to have an open mind and 30 minutes or so to spare. We sometimes will have guests from everywhere around the world, and we will always be keen to hear your thoughts. We have a fantastic episode for you today, so please stay with us and weigh in while we argue the case. Lovey life. In today's episode, we are going to talk about migration. Understand here the movement of persons. When brainstorming ideas about themes for the first season, we realize that when people or media outlets usually report on this notion, it is always under the political lenses and rarely under legal ones. We thought it predictable, yet unfortunate, because migration is one of the topics that lends itself quite perfectly for law, especially international law, which is, as you know, the focus of Dome. To be clear, migration is not always an international phenomenon. For it to become international, there must be frontiers crossed. It sounds extremely ridiculous to state it, I know, but it has to be said, because I know that subconsciously you have been thinking for the past 2 minutes about immigration, and more specifically, the illegal kind. How could you not? The media are full of reports like this. We are going to talk about illegal immigration, of course, but we will always point out that it is absolutely not the only form migration takes. The goal in the next 30 minutes or so is to take events, some that have been on the front page of news outlets around the world, some that have not been reported on for a multitude of reasons, and qualify them, which is the process where we put a legal filter on a set of facts in order to properly categorize them, if that makes sense. Let me give you an example to help you understand what I mean. A situation where A fires a gun and as a result of that shot, B is pronounced dead. What I just said, that sentence is factual. Those are facts, but those are not legal facts. They need to be legally qualified because the same set of facts can be deemed murder 1, murder 2, or 3, manslaughter, involuntary homicide, accident, self-defense, etc., etc. And this depends, of course, on a myriad of factors. I won't bore you too much, but hopefully you get the idea. So, on to our theme. According to the latest data made available by the International Organization of Migration, the IOM in short, there were 281 million of migrants, which amounts to 3.6% of the population. Though there is not one profile, and really this is the crux of the matter, we can generalize by stating that most people migrate for economic and or social reasons. Quite simply put, they believe that what they are going to find there is better than what they leave here. Now, they can decide to move on their free will, trying their luck. Or they may move under duress to protect themselves and their families from wars, droughts, persecutions, etc., etc. And if we are being honest, these are the migrants we think about when we talk about migration. And how could we not? This is where the spotlight always is. And this migration often works from the southern hemisphere towards the northern one. When people think of international migration, this is that flux. So we decided to have a little bit of fun, right? We just decided to look into the news of the last month. Literally, only in the last 30 days, in countries situated over the equator line. And I think you know what the papers talked about. The US midterm elections, obviously. The war in the Ukraine, obviously. The election in Italy, and the appointment of a new British Prime Minister. All of these major events in these countries have the common thread or undercurrent of immigration. To be fair, immigration always plays a major role during election cycles. But let's say a word about every one of these events. The midterm elections in the United States this past month focused mainly on the cost of living crisis, with a global recession looming. However, in states that share a border with neighboring countries, the immigration issue is always a live one. As far as the war in the Ukraine is concerned, the question of people fleeing war is obviously central. Humanitarian corridors have been put into place for refugees, and the European solidarity for its citizens has certainly been on full display since February and should be applauded. This is an interesting segue into the other news that has dominated the coverage of the month of October, and that is the elections of the first woman as a prime minister in Italy and the appointment of the first British prime minister of Indian descent. How does that relate to our topic of migration from a legal perspective? Let's see. So, Italy first. The country saw the first woman elected prime minister, and one of her first decisive acts regarding the situation of migration was the case known as the Ocean Viking boat. If you don't know what happened, you need a little bit of context. The Mediterranean Sea is one of the main routes used by migrants trying to arrive in Europe, mainly from North Africa and the Mashrek region. There are a lot of casualties, with people dying during the voyage or barely making it to shore. Europe, and more specifically the European Union, decided to address the matter collectively. I make the distinction, which I am sure you're all familiar with, but as this podcast ambitions to be listened by people everywhere around the world, I point out that there is obviously a difference between Europe, which is the continent, and the European Union, which is a legal and supranational entity composed of certain countries of the continent. One of the great strengths of the EU is the level of integration it has achieved, and a shining example is the Schengen area, which is a zone in the European Union where there are no frontiers, meaning that you can freely go from one country to the next without any specific documentation asked, so long, obviously, that you can legally justify being in the area in the first place. Because the elimination of frontier is effective inside the Schengen area of the European Union, the entry requirements are heightened. They won't say it like this, but it is essentially what it is. If you are from a country that requires a visa to enter the area, you are going to have to jump through ridiculous obstacles, even if you're just coming to visit friends over Christmas. We must be honest here. What does it have to do with what we are discussing? Well, it's not going to be politically correct, but oh well. Simply put, the European Union tries its darnest to keep out of its shores certain profiles. The statement could apply to virtually every country and every regional organization in the world, to be sure. There is no judgment there on my part. It's just a statement of fact. So, one of the best ways to ensure that you get the desired outcome is always to regulate, i.e., resort to law. And because the matter is dealt with at the supranational level, it is going to be supranational law. Because of the maritime nature of the flux of migrants, points of entry in the Schengen area are mostly sea-bordering countries, most specifically Italy, Spain, and Greece. And again, you have to remember, once you are legally in one of these countries, you can move freely in all of them. So, what did the EU and specifically the members of the Schengen area do? They put in place a legal framework through a multi-pronged approach. I won't bore you with the articles and regulations, but I will try to schematically explain the process. The first part of the approach is to try and regulate the flux of people coming into the Schengen area. So, the EU has partnered with quote-unquote relay countries, which are strategically placed to try and stop people from trying to cross the sea. One such country is Turkey, as an important number of migrants are from Syria, Pakistan, and North Africa, and arrive to Turkey before trying to get to Greece or Italy mainly. And Turkey tries to do its best to stop these people from crossing. But of course, where there is a will, there is a way. And as soon as a corridor is closed by authorities, another route is created. Then, a second step is implemented. The agreement signed between Turkey and the European Union states that migrants that do not seek asylum or whose asylum request has been denied by the government of Greece and who left through Turkey are being sent back to Turkey. The cost is borne by the European Union so that they don't get to enter the Union. For each Syrian refugee rerouted to Turkey, and it is Syrian refugees alone, another one has to be placed in one of the countries of the European Union, in the limit of 72,000 people per year. Turkey, as the new host country, receives various advantages, like the elimination of visa requirement for Turkish citizens when they travel to the EU, and a financial contribution to the tune of a little under 10 billion euros as we speak, as well as the support of the EU members to the adhesion of Turkey to the Union. That is the deal in place. Make of that what you will. That is when things are somewhat under control. And then you have situations like the one of the Ocean Viking. The Ocean Viking is a humanitarian boat of the non-governmental organization SOS Mediterranea, which was in a rescue mission between October 22nd and October 26th. 3 rescue missions were carried out off the coast of Libya, and 3 more on the coast of Malta. In total, the boat rescued 234 migrants. Maritime law is very clear in these instances. The captain of the boat has to contact the nearest port in order to disembark its passenger. In this instance, it was Libya. The country did not respond. The captain then contacted Malta, which was the second closest, and incidentally, member of the European Union. But there again, there was no response. The captain then contacted Italy with the newly appointed Prime Minister Carla Meloni, whose administration also kept mum. Finally, after more than a week at sea without any direction, the captain of the boat contacted Spain, France, and Greece, which were the three nearest countries. That is a total of 6 states for those who are keeping score, none of which immediately responded. Humanitarian ideals, or law for that matter, be damned. In an unexpected twist, Italy announced that France had agreed to open a port for the boat to dock, at a time when France had not officially said so. A little bit uncomfortable, as you can imagine. Finally, placed before what one could call a fait accompli, France has exceptionally granted permission and access to its port, so the boat and its 234 migrants were able to dock. See, the problem is not really to rescue these migrants. Every country, on principle, agrees that they cannot let people die at sea. The problem is that the countries, after the initial rescue, for whatever reason, do not want to keep said migrants, except when they meet the standards set for asylum, which are 2 different issues in law, obviously. In situations like these, certain countries like Spain, Italy, and Greece are the first country of arrival and are the ones who have to come up with practical solutions to accommodate the newcomers. To be exhausted on the subject, France and Italy, under its new administration, are now locked in a disagreement about the implementation of maritime law and EU regulations. Elsewhere in Europe, there is another problem of migrants crossing the channel between France, again member of Schengen area and the European Union, and the United Kingdom, which is no longer part of the Union and was never part of the Schengen area. There has been a conflict between the 2 countries for years, because the UK deemed France's effort to control the channel to be subpar. After the appointment of Rishi Sunak as British Prime Minister, the topic became a hot issue again, and both countries have finalized an agreement whereby the United Kingdom will pay approximately 72 million euros to France in the coming 2023 year, so that France can reinforce security on its beaches, where an important number of migrants leave to try and reach the English coast. We said earlier that there was not a unique profile of migrants. There are asylum seekers, of course. There are economic migrants, of course. There are also dreamers and people just following others. And just like there is not one profile for migrants, there is not one treatment from host states. You see, to say that states are against economic migration is a bold-faced lie. That is not true. Legislations around the world are in place to fast-track the applications of a certain caliber of migrants. High net worth individuals, or with huge potential, coming from the south to establish themselves in the north, are, for the purpose of this discussion, migrants. The easiest and most obvious examples one would give is the one of athletes, or artists, performers, engineers, you name them. But it would not dawn on you or anyone else to think of them as a financial burden to a host country, which is what people say economic migration is, to some extent. The argument one can make is to say that these high net worth or high potential individuals may have entered the host country legally. The answer to which is that history shows that it is not always true. There is a former athlete coming from Central Africa, whose name I won't mention because his personal business is his. But he was a football player of the highest caliber in Spain, Italy, and England, who entered France illegally. But his potential was so high that the situation was handled. Another example was a young student coming from West Africa this time, studying physics in France, who did not have the requisite documentation at a certain point and had to leave. He ended up working for NASA. If you are interested, the name of these individuals are very easy to find online. The point is twofold. Firstly, the focus is always on illegal immigration, which I understand. It is an easy topic and it riles up nationalist tendencies. So in a time of crisis or election, it is one of the oldest tricks of the book. But, time and time again, let that illegal immigrant be productive or have a particular talent, and watch how quickly the discourse change. At that rate, countries like Canada and Australia are interested to look into because they are very upfront about migrations. They are interested in skilled migrants. They just say it out loud. They welcome it and they encourage the application process. If you meet the criteria, both countries will most likely welcome you with open arms. Now, obviously, this works in part because these countries have a large territory and have space to accommodate newcomers. That cannot be understated. The second point is this. No matter how stringent the control, there will always be migration. Illegal, not illegal, skilled, not skilled. Because it is part of the makeup of people. And there are, as usual, a multitude of angles we can look into. If we're looking into this from an historical context, but migration is as old as fire, really. The need to explore, to understand, to meet, to tame, or even conquer space is ingrained in our DNA. Though flawed on many levels, it is a fundamentally human trait that made humans create boats and, quote-unquote, discover new lands. I use quotation marks for discover because obviously the American and African continents, for example, were not just there waiting to be discovered and become Terra Nostra of the expedition parties. There were life, culture, heritage, and traditions which were destroyed, sometimes overnight and in an extremely bloody fashion, by the introduction of foreign elements and the institutionalization of appropriation and colonization, depending on the continent. I won't say much more on that, except to say that if you are a history buff or simply curious, there are a ton of freely available material on the topic. Which is more, to speak of the instinctive desire we have to migrate. When we finally charted the whole world, we started to look up, and that has led up to an increase of expedition missions largely funded by government and vastly wealthy individuals. The goal may be entirely scientific and even noble, as it has been reported countless times. But deep down, at the primal level, you cannot convince me that the thought process is not the same of that of those men around the fire some millennia ago. If you have been listening to our podcast since the beginning, first of all, thank you so much. We are truly grateful. Second of all, you know by now that wherever there is a human interest, there are eventually rules and regulations, i.e. law. And outer space is not exempt of that truth. There are international instruments available on our website if you want to read them, obviously, that, for example, deal with the registration of objects launched into outer space, or an agreement governing the activities of states on the moon and other celestial bodies. By the look of things, give it a little time, and there may be real-life ship's captains tasked to go where no man has gone before, to infinity and beyond. Thank you so much for being with us today. I want to hear what you have to say. Do you have any comments, questions? Does it make sense? Does it not? Leave a comment below the link of the episode on our social media platforms using the hashtag #LoveyLife. The transcript of the program will be available on DOM's website in both French and English. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing, liking it, and subscribing to the show. We have had some great episodes previously, and we would be very grateful if you would consider listening to them. We will be back with our next episode next Wednesday. In the meantime, please stay safe and take care of yourself.